Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. This is a Comprehensivist Wednesdays that we do in collaboration with the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. Today, we are going to be talking about dialogue. And this is a series of taking three thinkers and looking at each of their ideas first, and then looking at commonalities and differences between their ideas. This is going to be particularly challenging. It's going to be David Bohm, Owen Barfield, and Martin Buber. So we're going to start with with Maritza talking about David Bohm. Maritza, please take your time. He's a thinker that we have not done any meetups on, so would love for people to understand how he approaches things, and then we will go to Owen Barfield, whom we have done a few meetups on. I think 3 or 4 meetups on, and then we will go to Martin Buber. We've done 1 or 2 meetups on him. So, and then once we have each of their thoughts about dialogue on the table, we will go ahead and start comparing them. Okay, so hold on to your seats. Please use this advanced device of pen and paper, which actually succeeds in, you can think about things, and when you go and you can write this down and it remains there as you go to the next one. And it allows you, especially if you have eraser, it allows you to organize them and see connections between them. And we're going to need this in order to keep track of ideas of each of these people, and even more so. So this is invaluable. I know it's very recent invention. I don't know how long ago, only 2,500 years ago, but it's still, it's still amazing. I think it's the greatest invention. So, all right, with that, let me hand it over to Maritza to talk about David Bohm.
Good evening, all. I would like to preface first and say I am not an authority on David Bohm. What I'm sharing with you is things that I've read and studied and looked at, and some things that I've also gleaned from our good friend CJ, because he's the one who actually introduced me to him. So I'm gonna start you off with actually a quick synopsis of a quote of David Bohm. David Bohm said, "Dialogue is really aimed at going into the whole thought process and changing the way the thought process occurs collectively. We haven't really paid much attention to thought as a process. We have engaged in thoughts, but we have only paid attention to the content, not to the process." So that's his words kind of describing what he perceived to be the issue that dialogue addressed and corrected. So when I'm talking about on dialogue, that's one of his books where he expresses his concepts of dialogue. And his concept, he tells us, his concept of dialogue, it's a holistic and transformative approach to communication and human interaction. He views dialogue as extending beyond words. To Bohm, it is a way of being and relating to others that has the potential to transform both individuals and society. David Bohm's concept, it encourages a shift from confrontational and fragmented modes of communication to a more collaborative and holistic approach. Through dialogue, individuals can suspend their assumptions, engage in empathetic listening, and collectively explore complex issues, ultimately fostering deeper understanding, harmony, and the emergence of new insights. So in his book, he goes on and he outlines he puts forward this path for how to engage in dialogue. And the most important thing here is that we're not seeking to determine who's right or who's wrong. Where what makes it a dialogue and not a discussion and not an argument is that you are looking at both sides without making a determination of the correctness or less correctness of either position. There's a couple facets that he explores, and I'm going to go through a few of them here. So The first is participation and exploration. Bohm emphasizes that dialogue is a collective process in which participants engage in open and authentic communication. It's not about debate, persuasion, or reaching predefined conclusions. Rather, it's about mutual exploration and understanding. The next big thing is that we should suspend assumptions, right? So Bohm suggests that participants should strive to suspend their assumptions, beliefs, and preconceived notions during dialogue. This suspension creates a space for new insights and new perspectives to emerge. The next definer of dialogue is shared meaning. The goal of dialogue is to create a shared pool of meaning among participants. Bohm believes that through sustained and deep dialogue, individuals can discover common ground and achieve a deeper understanding of complex issues. In tandem with this shared meaning, listening and empathy is fairly primary here in considering dialogue. So active and deep listening is a crucial aspect of dialogue. Participants should genuinely listen to one another, trying to understand each other's perspectives without judgment or defensiveness. Bohm sees empathy as a key ingredient in fostering meaningful dialogue. Collective intelligence. Bohm suggests that when individuals engage in genuine dialogue, the group's collective intelligence can surpass the sum of its individual members' intelligence. Through dialogue, participants can tap into shared wisdom and thoughts. And this is a piece that is like really fascinating to me, and that I see we get the pleasure of seeing that here with our Comprehensivist Wednesdays, right? So another facet of dialogue, per Bohm's perspective, is in dissolving fragmentation. So Bohm believes that contemporary society is marked by fragmentation, both in thought and in action. He sees dialogue as a way to address this fragmentation by promoting interconnectedness and harmony among individuals and communities. I really like that he goes on, these major points that I've described thus far have been a little bit more intangible, but he goes on, he talks about the practical application. And Bohm's ideas on dialogue are not confined to academic or philosophical discussions. He believes that dialogue can be applied in various domains, such as education, business, politics, personal relationships, and that dialogue can be used to enhance communication and foster creative problem solving in just about any arena. He also speaks about, if we're talking about in any arena, he believes that there's a specific role for the facilitator. So while he does acknowledge that dialogue can happen spontaneously, he points out and recognizes the value of skilled facilitators who can guide the process and ensure that participants adhere to the principles of open and authentic communication. To me, him adding in and acknowledging that aspect really brings home just the absolute deep thought that he's put into laying out a process. So of the three that we'll discuss today, Bohm is the most methodical. He has a vision and a layout for how he perceives dialogue should run. And it's not structured per se, because he does acknowledge that, it's spontaneous, it can go in many directions. But in all of the major points that he presents to us, the idea of, participation, exploration, suspending assumptions, shared meaning, listening and empathy, collective intelligence, dissolve and fragmentation, practical application, and the facilitator's role. In all of those, what he's doing is telling us that what's required most is awareness, right? The idea, and that takes us back to the initial quote that I started us with, where I mentioned that he was of a mind that we haven't really paid much attention to thought as a process. And what that basically means is that we engage in thought without much awareness, without much discipline. And so, to my view, David Boehm's entire book, On Dialogue, is a call to increased awareness, increased intentionality in both one's thoughts and one's words. And I'm going to retract words actually, because he does make a point of stating several times throughout the book that that dialogue transcends words. He speaks about all the various things that we say without words, and how all of it, through following these aspects, can be leveraged to make something bigger than just a base level word vomit, as it were. That's not his word. That's my paraphrasing. So, Shrikant, that is my very high level descriptor. Do you want me to dive into some things? Do you want me to stop there? What do you think?
I
Thinking.
think let's do one thing. Let's go to all three, and then we will go one more round. What I want to do, so first, now I'm going to call on Phil to talk about Owen Barfield. Then I'll talk briefly about Martin Buber. And then I'm going to invite people who are familiar with these people to add their own thoughts. So on Bohm, I'm going to ask Jeff to add more. If there is anybody who wants to add on Owen Barfield, he's welcome to do that. Then we will go ahead and add something for Martin Buber. And then we will start discussing commonalities first, and then we will do differences. So that's the overall plan. So now it's up to Phil. Phil, thank you for joining at such short notice.
Sure.
I just texted Phil saying that we are going to be talking about dialogue, and we're going to be talking about Owen Barfield's approach to dialogue and communication. Now, Phil knows this much better than me or most people, so would love to hear what Phil has to say. Phil, please take your time. It can be as short as 5 minutes. It can be as long as 15 minutes, doesn't matter. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, maybe first, can I ask, like, I mean, Barfield had obviously a lot of different ideas. What is the primary, from what I understood, the primary context here is communication. And
that's right. Dialogue, mostly kind of one-on-one dialogue, but we can interpret it largely as communication between one mind and another, whether it be author or it may be done spoken.
Right. Okay. Okay. Well, I guess, Barfield's, I think, primary contribution to the field is his understanding and enunciation of this concept of language as being almost like an analog of the bones we find in the earth that allow us to unearth ancient consciousnesses, right? So words and language and their original meaning, far from being of just theoretical interest, they actually preserve the living thinking of people that preceded us and that are no longer here, but their way of thinking and their consciousness is essentially embedded in the language itself. And so when you study the history of language or even just etymology of a single word or a phrase, what you're really doing is something very similar to what a paleontologist is doing when he gets out his shovel and it starts digging, and all of a sudden he sees something that is no longer here, an animal that roamed the earth perhaps millions of years ago, but is no longer here. Now, the trick for him is to try to reconstruct that animal from these remains. And the trick for us in language is try to reconstruct the consciousness and the understanding of the people that have used language and used those words that have since changed their meaning. I guess the difference is, we don't see bones walking around the streets. They're kind of dormant. But unlike that, the words that we use today have potentially been used for hundreds of years, but they have sort of ossified and changed their meaning. And so we no longer, because they have ossified, we no longer see through them. They're somewhat opaque to us. And so, and also what's opaque is that consciousness, the original consciousness that was there when these words were originally kind of formulated, and they were being put into the language. So when we try to go back and try to figure out what the original meanings were, and of course for Barfield, the motivation for that was his discovery that ancient languages had a certain poetry about them that modern language doesn't seem to have anymore. And he was very intrigued by it, and so he started to dig deeper, and that led him to the study of language as a whole, and also just kind of this archaeology, right? The paleolinguistics, if you will. So what he unearthed and what he discovered is a term that he called consciousness of participation, whereby what he means is words that we currently think of as metaphors were not metaphors to the people that were using them. They were actually their experience. So when we say that, I guess, my heart is heavy, or I am, this person has a big heart or kind heart or something like that, obviously we don't necessarily think of the heart as being somehow a recipient or the cause of the emotion, but we associate it, right, with that, because our body is not divorced, from our emotions. But to I guess the person that originally spoke of this, it was all kind of, the experience was all one. There was no difference between the body and the spirit and the emotions. It was all the same experience. And so the words reflected that original, what he calls participation, that we no longer have, because our lives have changed dramatically. We're removed from nature. We don't necessarily live the same way that men lived tens of thousands of years ago. But the language still carries those original echoes of that experience. And that, I guess, in terms of dialogue and communication, I guess the dialogue is between us today and people that are no longer here from before. And the dialogue happens when we read poetry, because we rediscover the links that we no longer make consciously, but they're there in poetry. And what Barfield is postulating is that these links are not artificial. They're not just a device, a literary device. They're actually something that was just an experience of the people that created these words. So that's in a nutshell, I guess.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to talk briefly about Martin Buber. But what I want to do at this point is to ask people if they want to speak about any of these three people. If you have spent some time, if you have read any books by them, please go ahead and add your 2 cents in trying to put their thoughts on the table. So Jeff is going to do that for Bohm. And if there is anybody who would like to do this for Barfield or for Buber, you're welcome to do that. Just go ahead and put their name there and say that you would like to talk in the chat about any of these three people. So Martin Buber, again, I have read parts of his book, I Thou, and we've done one meetup on it. So I'm telling you what I have gleaned from a very little study of him. He's a very deep thinker. But the core idea, as I understand it, is as follows. most people relate to each other at a superficial level. I mean, I call it, he calls it I-it level. I call it me-it level. So they regard other people as objects of objects that can offer them something. And they regard even themselves as objects. That's why I call it distinguish between me and I. They're not looking at themselves holistically, and they're not looking at the other person holistically. They're simply looking at what they can get from the other person, what the limited concept of themselves can get from the limited concept of the other person. And the relating that is going on is based on that. If you want to use Aristotle's terms, this is friendship of utility or friendship of pleasure, which Aristotle considers lower level of interactions between friends. What Bube is talking about is what Aristotle's concept of friendship of character is pointing to. It's the same kind of a thing where you're saying it is the best way I approach it is through the Indian philosophy and the concept of namaste. When you're saying namaste, it actually means that the God in me greets the God in you. So the deepest part of you, deepest part of me, is relating to the deepest part of you. The whole of me is relating to the whole of you. And the moment you start relating to the other person with what Carl Rogers calls, authentic relating, where you are actually interested in the other person themselves, their own nature, then suddenly the context dramatically changes. And that is the distinction, that is the level of communication that Martin Buber is pointing to, that this is something that is possible for us, and this is something profoundly transformative. That is the core of his idea as I understand it. So now we've put these three on the table. Let me do one thing now. Let's have Jeff present on David Bohm. And then if anybody wants to add anything about Owen Barfield or Martin Buber, they're welcome to do that. And Maritza, if you could moderate, I need to take a call. If you could moderate during this time. And then once that is done, Maritza has a very nice slide with bullet points about all these three. So we'll put that on the table, just not comparisons, but just trying to capture their nature. And then next, we will go and start discussing the commonalities between them, between the three of them, what commonalities you see, and then we will discuss the differences. All right, Jeff, give me just a second. Let me go ahead and unmute everybody here. Go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, hi, Shukat. Hi, everyone. I was not thinking about doing my own presentation about Bohm, but I'm happy to share a little introduction. I actually, Shukat, you probably are aware that that Bohm was very influenced by. In fact, he considered the person his greatest influence on this, Jiddu Krishnamurti. I mean, he said, and Bohm basically said, if you want to understand me, first, really look closely at the writings and the thoughts of Krishnamurti. Bohm, interestingly enough, philosophically, and then I'll jump quickly to concrete examples of what he was advocating and what he practiced. Bohm came into this kind of, after the Second World War, and he was concerned about the survival of humanity, and what he saw was that given humanity's technological ability to end life for all human beings and most other living things on the planet, that the process that human beings sort of default to for what he called discussion is really not what folks sort of in their minds think of when they think about discussion. He said discussion is largely argument. It's about somebody establishing that they are right, that it has its, it's really a form of debate, and that sort of expanded and into the way that all human beings interact with each other, in small groups and in large groups and between countries and really on the planet, was an exceptionally dangerous and unwise practice. And so he set along this idea of dialogue as an alternative to, as Maritza correctly said, discussion, but by which he really meant discussion, something that usually degenerated into debate and then argument. And so I'm going to read one very quick kind of quote here from Krishnamurti, since we'll follow Bohm's own reference here. He said, here's the person that he was most influenced by, and then I'll offer a couple of very practical, some other things with regard to the practice of dialogue. What is a group? Surely it is you and I, isn't it? To form such a group, you and I must free ourselves from the desire to be secure, to be identified with any particular idea, belief, conclusion, system, or country. That is, you and I must begin to free ourselves from seeking shelter in an idea, in a belief, in knowledge. Then obviously you and I are the group who are free from the exclusiveness of belonging to something. But are we such a group? Are you and I such entities? If we are not free from belief, from conclusion, from system, from idea, we may form a group, but we will create again the same confusion, the same misery, the same leadership, the same liquidation of those who disagree, and so on and on. So before we form a group at all, we must first be free of the desire to be secure, to take shelter in any belief, in any idea, in any system. And you and I are free. Are you and I free of that desire? If we are not, then let us not think in terms of groups and future action, but what is important, surely, is to find out not merely verbally, but inwardly and deeply, both in the conscious as well as the hidden parts of our own minds and hearts, whether we are really free from any sense of identification with a particular group, with a particular nation, with a particular belief or dogma. If we are not, then in starting a group, we are bound to create the same mess, the same misery. Jiddu Krishnamurti. And so what Bohm was grounding his thinking and his practice of dialogue in was, one way to think of it was, get free from the desire and the need to be right. I'll say that again, to get free from something that seems to be embedded in probably the human condition, which is a desperate need to be the one who is right. And instead, take this orientation, as Shrikant expressed it regarding Bube, where one develops a sincere curiosity in why other people think what they think and perceive what they perceive, and to engage in dialogue, which is really a learning process, not a process of deciding who is right, but a true process of learning. And in practice, it sounds a little bit like, can you tell me more about that? What else can you tell me about that? Let me say back to you what I'm hearing. Did I get it right? If not, could you share with me a little bit more about that? What experiences have led you to that perception or that orientation? So that we really, it's a practice of deep listening. Of course, as each person is invited to do, it's also an authentic presentation of one's own perceptions, but with a certain humility about it, that what I'm presenting is not necessarily the way. Might be my way, might be my perception, might be my orientation, but it doesn't have to be the way. Because as soon as my way is the way, deep listening and empathy and actual learning declines.
Thank
And
you.
so
Jeff.
that's it.
Really appreciate your thoughts, because you have used this. So this is very helpful. Thank you. All right. Does anybody else want to comment either on Owen Barfield or on Martin Bube? You're welcome to do that. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to say something. If you're familiar with either of them, go ahead and type an exclamation mark. If nobody answers the next 10 seconds, then we'll have Maritza talk about, her bullet point, capturing of these three people. Maritza, go ahead.
Okay, so you mentioned a slide. So I did put it in a slide if you wanted me to throw it on the screen for a moment.
Sure.
Just some people are very visual. Okay, 1 second. Let me start the slideshow. Okay, are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so simple, I just threw it up on here. So I took and pulled out 4 major thoughts on each one of these authors or philosophers or just thinkers for you guys here today. I'm gonna just read them. And these are, they're very high level. So if any of you see something here that makes you feel that there's a point that's a dive deeper point that we need to hear, please type exclamation and let us know. So for David Bohm, his concept of dialogue emphasizes open and authentic communication. And he's looking at dialogue as a means to explore and uncover underlying assumptions, beliefs, and thought patterns, in addition to seeking to transcend individual perspectives and create a shared pool of meaning through collective inquiry. And he's focusing on interconnectedness and understanding, both through in our society and a way of banishing our fragmentation of thought. Owen Barfield, as Philip told us, is very known for his thoughts on language and our consciousness. So his work includes the notion of original participation. It's a belief that in ancient times, humans had a more direct participatory relationship with the world and with language. And he argued that as human consciousness evolved, language became more abstract, and that led to the separation between the self and the external world. And he went on to highlight that the evolution of human understanding and language and the role of consciousness all play a major aspect in shaping our perceptions. Martin Buber's philosophy centers around the I-thou, the I-it relationships. The I-thou represents a deep and authentic encounter with another person or entity, and that's characterized by mutual recognition and presence. And the I-it relationship involves objectification and reduction of the other to an object or tool for one's purposes. Buber underscores the importance of genuine and meaningful encounters with others to foster human connection and ethical responsibility. I do want to make the disclaimer that I chose these bullets with an eye to picking the aspects within each thinker that aligned themselves nicely for comparison. So again, if you see something missing and you think it needs to be put on the table, do feel free to chime in.
All right, so let's go ahead now, get to the next stage. We've tried to put these things on the table. Firstly, we have to understand that each of these thinkers are each of them is incredibly deep. And what we are going to do today is going to be just skimming on the surface in some ways. But we've learned that using multiple perspectives, perspective of one on the other, comparing them, we get something deeper. So I want to start with similarities between thinkers. If you would like to comment on similarities between any two of them, their ideas, their approaches, how their ideas kind of go together, please go ahead and do that. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom in order to discuss, in order to make your comments. Try to keep your comments brief because we're going to go through multiple rounds of this. Similarities and differences is, one difference. Maybe we can divide it further. So try to keep your comments concise so we can get as many different comments on the table, and we will keep building this up. So go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to point out some similarities. If you have a lot to say, that's fine too. Just go ahead and divide it, say a point, then come back later and add more points, okay? So go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to talk about any similarities that you see between these folks. Yes.
Wow, people are gathering up their thoughts. Let me just give 2 or 3 sentences on a quick summary of how I would look at comparing them. I would look at comparing Bohm's concept of dialogue with Owen Barfield's ideas, Buber's philosophy, and looking at them to explore different facets of communication, consciousness, and ethics. I think that so Bohm's dialogue focuses on open inquiry. Buber's philosophy emphasizes authentic encounters, and Barfield's work, provides the historical perspective on language and conscious evolution. But all three of them are kind of culminating to a point on inviting thinkers to intentionally contribute to our understanding of human interaction and consciousness. So it's all three of them sound the call towards increased thinking about thinking, as it were.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Maritza. Next up is Katie. Katie, go ahead.
Looking at the differences, I think like Bohm and Bube, I kind of see them as a little bit in contrast to Barfield because like objectification and fragmentation, that for me implies people that don't know each other very well. Whereas I see Barfield as kind of small. It's just like the humans had a more direct participatory relationship. I see those as small communities where people might have possibly known each other. And a lot of the words that they use would have been things that would have been around them and been useful for them.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. So we're going to first focus on the commonalities, because what that does is that it establishes the base. And then I think discussing differences after commonalities is far more powerful. So let's go to Bill. Bill, go ahead.
Thanks. Thank you all for these presentations, really helpful and articulate. And I also just glanced at the Wikipedia page for all three authors on dialogue. So what I have to say, and I will keep it brief, is based in part on what I saw in the Wikipedia pages. So the similarities I see, at least one similarity, is in the dichotomy between receptivity and non-receptivity. And each one focuses on receptivity. So that's clearest in Bube with the I thou, and switching from an I it to an I thou is becoming more receptive to the other person, to receptive to more about the other person. Okay, so that's Bube. Bohm, according to the Wikipedia page, Bohm advocates self-awareness of habitual ways of thinking in order to transcend habitual ways of thinking, learn how to think differently about things. And so that's, again, receptivity. But here it's receptivity to, thinking about things a little differently than one is habitualized into thinking about things. Bohm, on the Wikipedia page, it talked about how he has this notion that primitive human beings, thousands or tens of thousands of years ago, had a more direct relationship with physical reality because they weren't thinking so much and they weren't caught up in language so much. And language they did use, they had like a single word to describe a whole kind of unified experience. So for him, receptivity is being receptive to the unity of things, to the unity that one experiences when one gets beyond language and beyond thought, which is kind of similar to Bube in that the I-thou relationship, the way Bube talks about it, according to the Wikipedia page, it's this very holistic experience that kind of transcends words. It's very kind of, I don't know what the words are to say it. So I'll stop there. Thanks for.
Thank you, Bill. So let me have a go at this, and folks, just feel free to keep adding things here. We're looking at commonalities. So firstly, I would say that all three of them have a very exalted view of what human beings can be. That is there throughout. They're saying, look, Bube is saying, wait a minute, you're missing who you are, and you're missing what the other person is. What Owen Barfield is saying is that you're missing all the richness of what is going on. You're using these words as dead things, but they were alive once, and they had a life, and you're missing a lot when you're actually using language. There is a lot more depth to language. And Bohm is saying that, you're fragmented. If you're open and actually authentic in relating, you will get a lot more. You have to do a lot of unveiling. See, the idea of unveiling is a very deep idea that runs across all three. It's saying, like David Bohm talks about it explicitly. Owen Barfield is saying, unveil the language, and through it, unveil the consciousnesses that are speaking it. Buber is talking about the same thing. He's saying, you're looking at people as it. You're looking at the surface things. There is something inside people, which is incredibly rich, incredibly valuable. You need to unveil that and be receptive. I think receptivity is that runs through. Listening runs through. But a premise below that is the depth and richness and grandeur of human beings. The sheer complexity of it, the respect for complexity of human beings, so that you're not regarding them as objects. In case of Buber, you're conscious of what is being carried through their language. In case of Owen Barfield, he talks about the felt transformation of consciousness as being what is possible in language, where you use language or poetry to connect to someone and you discover something about existence, about yourself, about human condition. And you have this experience which is at once an aesthetic experience, an epistemological experience, a metaphysical experience, and an ethical experience, all rolled into one. That is what powerful communication makes possible. That is the result of communication. Similarly, David Bohm is saying that instead of being fragmented, let us see the connections, let us form, let us work to create, shared pool of meaning, shared premises, shared values, and unveiling. The point about unveiling keeps coming back, that it's not the surface things. The words carry meaning. When somebody is saying something, actually their entire life is coming, is the context for the words that are coming through. Each of them explore this complexity of human condition in their own way. Martin Buber says that there is a core to your being, which is grander. Owen Barfield focuses on how this plays out in language itself. And David Bohm talks about that most people have parts. By being open to kind of connecting those parts and building up something based on that, that is one of the ways of expanding. So these are some of the commonalities that I see. So again, if you'd like to discuss commonalities of these, please go ahead. Mike, go ahead, 2 minutes, please. Mike, you need to unmute yourself. Okay, I don't know what's going on. Mike? Okay, there may be some problem. Mike, whenever you're ready, go ahead and raise your hand again. Okay. All right, anybody else wants to talk about any more similarities that you see?
I'm going to jump in here for a second.
Go ahead.
Shrikant, based on what you said, I'm going to piggyback a little bit. So you talked about language, and you know, language is, it's a recurring theme in the work of all three. I think they also all three acknowledge the power of language in shaping consciousness, understanding, and communication. You know, Barfield does it through exploring the evolution of language. Buber is emphasizing the significance of language in genuine encounters. That's his I thou. And then Bohm is addressing the relationship between language and thought in his expressions on I dialogue. So that was just wanted to add that to what you had said there. And another thing that comes up for all three of them is the concept of interconnectedness. And we actually see that ourselves in many you know, circumstances and other things that we've discussed. So all three of them are highlighting interconnectedness and in all aspects of like human existence. So to use some terminology we're familiar with, they're actually highlighting interconnectedness throughout universe, right? And so they're what they all seem to be doing is stressing that individuals are not isolated entities, but they're all part of a larger whole. So I just thought it was fascinating that they're all three of them do that in a very different way, but that's the, you could, to me, as you were talking, Shrikant, I could just see us circling to that commonality. Let's see if Mike's ready. I'll stop there.
Perfect. Thank you. So I will just add one thing. I mean, this interconnectedness. That's another, that's great point. So all of them think not only that each human being has this grandeur, but all of them also think that there is so much to be gained by human interaction. And that runs through all of them, you know, because they're all, you know, Buber is saying, I thou will transform you. Owen Barfield is saying, by actually connecting through language to other consciousnesses, that is going to, again, do felt transformation of consciousness, will transform you. And David Bohm is saying the same thing. It's a very, you know, it's saying yes to individual and yes to interaction between individuals. Excellent. Next up is going to be Mike. Mike, go ahead. You need to unmute, please.
Okay. I got a hold of Krishnamurti in the concept of his network of thought book, of how the different parts of the mind are connected in the same way as the different parts of the mind are connected in terms of the right half and the left half of the brain, but also in terms of how we are all connected as one. Both Jung, Schrödinger, and Krishnamurti had a concept that how many unique consciousness are there in the world? And the answer that they came up with is really only one. That everything that's conscious is linked together. Now that's a concept in physics of how entanglement and wave-particle duality works. Now, just as Krishnamurti had Bohm, and it's hard to decide whether Krishnamurti became the inspiration for Bohm's de Broglie Bohm physics effect, or how Wolfgang Pauli inspired Jung to his unique consciousness effect, or whether Jung inspired his physicist for that effect. Now, they both contributed to both effects, is the answer. Now, some of this, Bohm published material on this, and Krishnamurti's book, The Network of Thought, explained how we're loosely coupled microprocessors, not just between different individuals, but between different segments of the brain. The votes aren't all in as to what's really going on, but there's something there as to how consciousness works in both the world of physics and in the world of philosophy and psychology.
Thank you, Mike. Really appreciate it. Next up is going to be Bill. Bill, go ahead.
Thanks. Listening to everyone, it occurs to me there's another similarity. Each of these three thinkers presents a dichotomy between two states of consciousness, a less functional state and a more functional state. And the less functional state of consciousness for each of these three thinkers can be at times less functional. It can be at times even counterproductive. So the first point is that each of these three thinkers has a model of the more productive state of consciousness, but each of the three also has a model in mind of the less productive state of consciousness. Point one. Point two, each of these three thinkers seems to be claiming that the way to get more of the more functional consciousness is by becoming more aware of the less functional state of consciousness in terms of how it works. And each of the three seems to be saying that dialogue between two or more individuals can increase each individual's awareness of how the less functional model of consciousness is working in his own life as an ingredient to get less of it and more of the more functional state of consciousness. It seems to be a similarity. Okay, so I'll stop.
Excellent point. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Absolutely. I mean, each of them have a very explicit, like it as a model here, kind of dead words as the model for Owen Barfield, fragmentation as the model for a Bohm, and each of them have dialogue. I mean, another way of looking at it is that like form and function, like both when you look at objects, fragmentation, and dead words, all of them are forms, and what they are advocating, all of them are functions that run through, like dialogues are kind of going back and forth, and they actually soften these ossified forms and make them live. And so that flow is what they are focused on, what is going on between the I and the thou. Between this fragmented consciousnesses trying to be open and authentic, and thereby transforming each other, being actually open to poetry from another era or from a person very different from you, which allows you to go beyond your own limitations or self-imposed limitations. Great point. All right, let's now dive into differences. So folks, what differences do you see between them? Where would these people disagree with one another? What is it that one of them has that the others don't have? So you don't necessarily have to say, okay, they would disagree with this, but you can say that this person takes this aspect much, much further than the other two or the other beings. So now we're trying to contrast. We are using, first we tried to do a, intersection of what is it that is common to all of them. Now we are trying to say, having done the intersection, what lies outside of the intersection? Where are they at a level higher? What do they know? What does one of them know that the other don't? So these are different ways of expressing, trying to get at the differences. So Katie, go ahead.
I'm looking at the Martin Buber bullet point, and I think he takes this idea of the going beyond just understanding, because I think they all kind of relate to dialogue, creates understanding, and he brings up ethical responsibility. So he thinks we might have obligations beyond just understanding, and I think that's really in his I thou I it, where I thou is kind of your classical professor, and or I sorry I it is your classical professor, and I thou is a dialogue.
Excellent. Thank you, Katie. I want to start by pointing out the difference in the backgrounds of these folks. You know, Martin Buber is a very deep kind of religious thinker, philosopher. He's coming at it from kind of observations about consciousness. He's coming from there. Owen Barfield is a philologist. So he's coming with a very deep understanding. He's coming at this issue of dialogue from a deep understanding of language. David Bohm is a scientist, and he's very much, is basing things on the conversation, the conversation in science, and is influenced by spiritual teachings of, for example, G. Krishnamurti. So there are kind of these two elements. So all of them have different backgrounds. I just wanted to put that on the table as just the difference of context. One is a scientist, one is a linguist, and one is a spiritual thinker. And that's the beauty of kind of comparing these things and trying to get at it. So what do you see? Maritza, what do you see in terms of differences? Oh, wait a minute. First, DLJ.
So I haven't obviously read comprehensively everything they've said, so I don't know whether they, in other writings, they may have actually agreed with each other. One thing I'm seeing as a difference, Buber is, I think, telling us that in order to be able to communicate, we need to subjectify, create the thou. Bohm doesn't seem to be saying that. It's that we can still do dialogue, we can still defrag, even if we don't have that sort of deeper connection, because we can just by passing the ideas across to each other, we don't actually need to know how much about the other person. And Barfield's actually saying that that other person doesn't even need to be alive.
Excellent points. Yeah. Thank you, DLG. Great point. I mean, absolutely, they're coming from very different. So it's like I think they would agree with this characterization and these differences. So thank you. Next up is Maritza. Maritza, what do you think?
I think that so of the three, David Bohm would be the least philosophically inclined, I guess. I did find myself realizing that I often keep referring to the three of them as philosophers, but I think that he was more, concerned from the very tangible aspect of dialogue as opposed to the more ephemeral, intangible aspects that we see the other two tackling, despite his belief in the interconnectedness of it all. He focuses on, the nature of thought. Owen Barfield is more looking at the nature of humans, as it were. Like I don't know. I think I would find that David Bohm is, if we're being critical, he would be the less personable of the other two philosophies, because he's very much more methodical, and he has like a laid out idea for how he's looking at this to go with. And while he identifies the difficulties of, entering into and remaining in a dialogue state, he does not necessarily do so from a existential angle. Like he's not looking at it from, the 1,000-foot human level of, where emotions would get in the way of our ability to maintain this dialogue state. Whereas I think the other two do address the emotional state of human nature.
Thank you, Maritza. I think DLG's distinction between Buber being kind of, coming at it from subjective experience, starting with the subjective experience, Bohm starting with the objective experience, and then when you try to place Barfield in there, is that he's talking about language across history. So it is objective in a sense, but he's also focused on the subjective reactions that you have to this objective history of language. So it's very interesting. He's kind of in the middle. He has both, he has aspects of both of those things. And of course, this is just where they're coming from. Each of them have the other to some extent. All right, now Maritza, you had some observations. Did you have comparisons? Do you want to use a slide?
I have those in the slide. I have my notes.
Okay, go for it.
Oh, I should have put them in a slide. Sorry. So if we're going back to comparisons, I was looking at, let's see, I have Bohm's dialogue is focused on open and collective exploration of ideas and assumptions. Barfield's ideas are addressing, language and consciousness. And that's I guess the language and consciousness for all three of them are shown through slightly different ways, but they all tackle that notion. And when in Bohm's shared meaning and how it addresses social fragmentation, I see that as a corollary with Buber's I-it and I-thou. So the I-it would be the fragmentation. Societal fragmentation would be included in the I-it, and the I-thou would be the aspect covering shared meaning. And in Barfield, for this concept, he's looking at, where the metaphor, when we lose sight of the metaphors that came before, now we're in this fragmentation also, and focusing on and remembering the evolution of a language is where we would get to the, collective exploration that would be where Bohm was talking about the shared meaning. So that was one of the big similarities that I looked at. And if we look at that same concept of shared meaning, if we look at it as from where they differ, the interpersonal communication was not something that Barfield would have specifically directly addressed, despite, because he's looking at the evolution, as it were, and he's looking at language, metaphor, and how language is perceived almost more closely than how language is communicated. Whereas Bohm and Buber are looking at how language is communicated, but they're doing it just, they're actually not focusing when they're looking at that on the evolution. So that's somewhere where Barfield stands alone, because his emphasis on the evolutionary path of language is unique amongst the three. And then if we're looking still at, this, like the shared meaning or shared consciousness, another way in which they do differ is that they're looking at, Buber's looking, he's explicitly addressing ethics and responsibility. And he's talking about interpersonal encounters that way. Bohm's dialogue, it's not explicitly ethical, even though it does have ethical implications, right? So, and then if we go to Barfield, he's actually looking at the impact. So his impact on human relationships for the evolution is an aspect of ethics, as it were. But I think that Buber's philosophy is the only one that explicitly talks about the responsibilities for each encounter that we as humans would go through in our day-to-day, as it were. Bohm and Buber have a similarity in that both of them approach the nature of human interaction and communication. So Bohm's sense, he would align with the I-thou relationship, in that both the I-thou relationship and Bohm's Art and Dialogue emphasize deep listening, mutual understanding, and genuine connection. And so the dialogues that fail to meet Bohm's criteria for dialogue, or I guess, conversations that fail to meet Bohm's criteria for dialogue, would fall under Buber's I-it relationship, where the participants are not fully engaging or empathizing with each other. That was something that I saw that was with those two. In some instances, it seemed much easier to me to see corollaries between Bohm and Buber and disparities between both of them and Barfield. I kind of got the feeling that Barfield, while he interweaves with them somewhat, he would be the one that stands out to me as the one with the most different ideas from all three of them.
Excellent observations. I agree with you that, basically David Bohm and Martin Buber are trying to talk about the same thing. They're coming at it from different angles, different purpose, but they are trying to do the same thing. They're trying to look at the dialogue in real time in people and what is going on and what are the issues involved in that. Whereas Barfield is an odd man out. His focus is on language over time. So that distinction is absolutely true. And at some point, I want to ask the question about how these two things are related to each other. And if they are related, how are they related? But let's go with Bill, followed by Jeff. Bill.
I would like to allow Jeff to go first because I'm not yet clear on how to express what I'm trying to express. So Jeff, you can go.
Jeff, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So one thing I would offer is that I think if we could ask Bohm himself, he would not say that he's just a scientist. He really went out of his way to credit and point to and quote really the philosophy of Krishnamurti as being not just influential to him, but really being foundational regarding his orientation and practice. So I think that he would not agree with that presentation of him, at least in terms of what was really important to him in that way. The interest, I think that there is an interesting thing here. I think in some ways, I think that what Bohm is saying is that is closely related to Buber's orientation, and but Bohm might say it a little bit like this. He would say there is there's an orientation in the human condition that focuses almost solely on I, and that it takes work. It takes, in his word, actually discipline to actually be engaged with others as thou, which is this really sincere curiosity about not only what other people think and what their perceptions are, but why. And he just takes it farther than very many folks dare to take it. And it's one of the reasons that he strongly recommends that those who wish to practice dialogue, as he defines it, really need a facilitator. Because he said that the predisposition is so great for folks to say, no, you're wrong. I think this and I'm right. Let me see if I can convince you to think differently, to really think the way that I do, versus to really explore, but to really sincerely and seriously be interested in exploring, and certainly authentically articulating whatever our perceptions and ideas and thoughts are. But the thing that really needed even more work and in his mind required a facilitator to maintain is this orientation of really finding out not just what, but why, and how people came to perceptions and ideas which they which they have. So I think that those two things, I think that he actually, like one of the things that's quoted here as from Krishnamurti that Bohm offered, and it's really it's very radical, really. This is from Krishnamurti. No belief, no, don't control anything. Observe that you have belief, you cling to the belief. Belief gives you a sense of security and so on, and that belief is an illusion. It has no reality. And I think that Bohm was influenced by this orientation to say, let's see if we can get past our conclusions and maybe surface our questions and maybe surface our own answers to them and maybe learn from each other as opposed to trying to convince each other of anything. So that's my sense of him.
Excellent point. I think Jeff, you're right. I mean, clearly my understanding of Bohm is relatively superficial, but even at a superficial level, you can very clearly see that he is profoundly influenced by Krishnamurti and a lot of spirituality. And that's actually interestingly that is what is common to all these three, not just him. Owen Barfield is a deeply spiritual person, though he's looking at language. That spiritual base is very strong. We went through his children's book, The Silver Trumpet, just incredibly deep ideas about spirituality, very simply expressed in the children's book. Same thing with Bube. So I think that is a commonality which is there, a very deep commonality which runs through all these three. Let's go with Bob first, and then we will go to Bill because Bob has not spoken before. Bob, go ahead. Bob, you need to unmute though.
Okay, this might be a little abstract because I don't know these fellows too well, except for Bube. Shrikant, you mentioned language, Barfield, science, and the spirit of the three guys. These are just reflections. The issue of the language is that there's an issue of communication. anytime you use language. So there's either a clarity or a depth or a missing of communication with language. So that's a limitation. I'm trying to compare these three guys. Science, Bohm, my notes say he talks about consciousness. There's an issue there of consciousness is connected with focus. You must have to focus on something when you're conscious. So you're going to put things in and you're going to leave things out. As far as Buber goes, I think he's I think of him as a people person. He contrasts I versus it. It things are relatively fixed. So you can manipulate it things because they stand, they don't move around. Whereas people are organic, and you cannot predict them. There are all kinds of levels of depth when you are yourself an organism, and when one organism interacts with another, you're going to have all sorts of unexpected results. So one should respect that.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. I agree with you on the last point is very important, which actually runs through all these three people. They are all saying that this is a living process. Don't be satisfied with the fragments that you have. Be actually open to other things. Let that flow. Don't regard other people as it and you as me, which is also another it. Just go back to the living things. You know, what Owen Barfield is saying is that do not be satisfied with dead words that somebody has coined, and everything on the coinage has been smoothened out, and you're just passing some meaningless things around. Go back and reprint the true meaning of others as well as your own on your words. So it's all about moving to living as opposed to dead things. So go ahead, Bob, you had something. Please go ahead and unmute. Oh no, okay. I'm sorry, I missed because I think everything moved around. Sorry, my mistake. Now, next up is Bill.
Thanks. Just for clarity, I'm in the park, so if the background noise is too loud, let me know and I'll mute and wait till I get back to my apartment.
No, it's no problem at all. Go ahead.
Okay. So at the beginning, Jeff read a long quote from David Bohm that was very thought-provoking. It was the quote about how anytime an individual joins a group, there's going to be problems. And if the individual brings their own habitual ways of thinking and seeing the world into the group, it's just going to replicate the problem. You remember that quote? Right. Okay. So,
well, actually, it's a quote from Krishnamurti.
Oh, really? Okay.
You know what? Let's have Jeff. Jeff, do you have the quote handy? Can you reread it?
I can. It'll take me just a second, but I'm also in a park. It's going to take me a minute to find it. I'll be back in like
that's fine.
2 minutes.
Let's go ahead. Continue, Bill, please.
Okay, so my recollection of the quote is that it basically was sending the message to the individual that they are at risk of making a mistake of looking to the group to meet certain of the individual's needs, that the individual really can only meet himself within himself. And whenever he looks to the group to get those kinds of needs met, there's going to be problems because they're really those particular kinds of needs are needs that only the individual can only get met from within himself in some way. So this seems to be a contrast with Buber, who seems to be saying that each individual has a particular very important need that he cannot meet himself, and that he needs to go outside himself to another person or a group to get met. And that is the need to be seen as more than just an object to be manipulated by others for their self-interest. The need to be seen as more than that. And the way that a person can get that need to be seen as more than that met is by going to another person and meeting their need to be seen as more than an object to be manipulated by others for their self-interest. To go to another person and meet their need to be seen as more than that. And by seeing that other person as more than that, there might emerge a reciprocity where that other person might see oneself as more than just an object to be, to be manipulated to meet others' needs. And so from this perspective, this is a need that people can only meet in relationship with other people through dialogue, that no individual can get this need met himself within himself. So that seems to be a contrast with Bohm, who's saying that you have to look inside yourself to get certain needs met before you go into relationship with others or with a group. However, Bohm does have a lot about dialogue, which might be resolving this apparent contradiction or dissimilarity or contrast. So I'll stop there.
Excellent point. Next up is Jeff. Jeff, go ahead.
So I found a quote, and actually it's a little bit different than you were taking it there. So you might find this intriguing. So here it is. It's a quote from Krishnamurti. What is a group? Surely it is you and I, isn't it? To form such a group, you and I must free ourselves from the desire to be secure, to be identified with any particular idea, belief, conclusion, system, or country. That is, you and I must begin to free ourselves from seeking shelter in an idea, in a belief, in knowledge. Then obviously you and I are the group who are free from the exclusiveness of belonging to something. But are we such a group? Are you and I such entities? If we are not free from belief, from conclusion, from system, from idea, we may form a group, but we will create again the same confusion, the same misery, the same leadership, the same liquidation of those who disagree, and so on and on. So before we form a group at all, we must first be free of the desire to be secure, to take shelter in any belief, in any idea, in any system. Are you and I free of that desire? If we're not, then let us not think in terms of groups and future action, but what is important surely is to find out, not merely verbally, but inwardly and deeply, both in the conscious as well as the hidden parts of our own minds and hearts, whether we are really free from any sense of identification with a particular group, a particular nation, a particular belief or dogma. If we are not, then in starting a group, we are bound to create the same mess, the same misery, from J. Krishnamurti. And so, I think that Bohm is actually exhorting or urging human beings to really be sincerely interested in the evolution and co-creation and ongoing changes that are happening in all of us and in the world and all the time, and not get locked in, and that one of the greatest ways to do that is to explore without agenda and without judgment the ideas and perceptions of others. So I think that's what's going on there.
Thank you, Jeff. Now we'll go with Bill, and then we're going to go to the next part where we're going to be talking about dialogue. Not what these three people have talked about, but what you think about dialogue. And you can weave in whatever you want from these other people, but it's all about, what you think about dialogue at its best, because all these three people are trying to point to what they think is dialogue at its best. So I'll ask you, what do you think is dialogue at its best? And you can use whatever concepts that you have to describe that. Bill, go ahead.
Okay, I'll try and be brief. So Jeff, thank you for reading that. The key phrases in that quotation that I was focusing on were the phrase identify with some group based on a belief system as a source of security. He's saying that's the problem. When an individual identifies with a group that's based on a belief system as the individual's source of security. And Krishnamurti is saying each person has to look within himself and notice when he's doing that. And I would simply translate that phrase, identify with a group based on a belief system as a source of one's security, as a synonym for notice when one is feeling a sense of insecurity and trying to solve it by identifying with a group based on a belief system. So it's not simply noticing that one is identifying with a group that's based on a belief system as a source of security. It's noticing when one is feeling a feeling of insecurity, and then noticing that one is trying to solve it by identifying with a group that's based on a belief system as a source of antidote to the insecurity, as a source of security. That's what Krishnamurti is talking about. And he's basically saying one can only do that in a relationship with oneself by becoming aware of the moment when one starts to feel that sense of insecurity and starts to latch on to identification with the group. So thanks for listening. I'll pass.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. All right, folks. So now to the question, what do you think about dialogue at its best? What are its characteristics? What are its challenges? What are its rewards? You can use inspiration of what we have heard so far, or you can put your own thoughts on the table. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to share. Maritza, you're the one who initiated this discussion. So what do you think about dialogue? What is a good dialogue? Or what is a great dialogue?
So the best aspect of a dialogue is one where we are in fact able to find some manner of separation from seeking an outcome. I think that, and it aligns very much with Bohm's thinking, in that the moment we're seeking to be right, or to be less wrong, or to be persuasive, we're no longer in a dialogue. We've slid out of dialogue and into discussion, because what the best dialogue does is it invites genuine inquiry. And I think that that's key, is that we've remained in an open position to take in multiple perspectives. And if we're constantly adjusting that and kind of letting go of making a stand, we can remain in the dialogue and then go from there. Those are my initial thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you, Maritza. Next up is Katie. Katie, go ahead.
Yeah, I think a dialogue is a conversation where, I guess I've been in a lot of groups where they say, it's nice to share your opinion without making someone else wrong. So you say, I think it's red, and the person next to you doesn't think it's red. But instead of saying, I don't think it's red, they say, I think it's blue, with the implication being it's not red or whatever it is. I think the point is, I don't think you have to come to an agreement at the end of a a dialogue. The point is not, but it's just to see where the other person to come with the mindset of I'm going to learn something and try to understand where this person is coming from.
Thank you, Katie. Let's see. I'm going to go back to these folks. I don't know Bohm much, so I'm not going to talk about him. I'm not, it's very intriguing what I've heard, and I think there are multiple threads there. But I'm a little bit more familiar with Martin Buber and Owen Barfield, and they're coming from. I mean, the base that they have is very deeply spiritual. And one of the things that they're saying is that there is something universal about human beings. And you're trying to get to that. I mean, Buber is doing that explicitly. And Barfield is doing that implicitly through language. It's trying to say, look and find the living element in the language that you're using, and let that live in you. So there is a idea of that there is something universal about human beings, and you're trying to use, so that is a framework that both of these people have. And I think even from whatever I've known about David Bohm, he clearly thinks that as well. And what happens is that we try to, it's like the Tao, you get focused on the 10,000 things, and you're passing those 10,000 things around, and you regard that as being the dialogue. But that's just you and 10,000 things, not even you. It's like 10,000 things interacting with other 10,000 things. And it is more superficial. And all of these folks are trying to get underneath that and trying to get to the core of what is responsible for these 10,000 things. And I think the biggest thing that I see is this life-giving nature of a true dialogue, where you are open to noticing what you have not noticed before. All of us have blinders about things. We're all kind of creatures of habit. We get habituated with different things. So if you're open to a dialogue and you're actually trying to listen to the other person, then you will catch something different that you have not noticed before about something fundamental. And it doesn't really, the other person, it's just the difference in perspectives, as Marissa was saying, that more the difference of perspectives. Most people have the tendency of remaining with people just like them on many things, and creating like these echo chambers where the blindness of each other is supported by saying that yes, that is the light. So this is a call. I mean, each of them in their own way is a call to opening up and saying yes to it. I also want to point out that this is not, I don't think any of these three are subjectivist people. They're not saying, that it is whatever you feel like. I mean, that is, our modern American culture is subjectivist. So maybe some people see only the subjectivist part of it. But these people are saying that there is something objective, like something real about the core of you. And there is something real about core of the world. There is something real about each human being, and be open to that. So that's a very different position than a subjectivist position. So, so those are my thoughts. Next up is Bob. Bob, go ahead.
The subject dialogue. If it is, I've had some really wonderful experiences with dialogue. What I like about it when it works for me is with things go back and forth when something is being developed, and I talk to the person. Something's not clear for me. I talk to the other person. They ask a question. They go into detail. We go into detail and we try to work things out. The opposite. I don't think this is worth mentioning unless we consider the opposite of dialogue. And I'll take two cases. One of them is when when a person wants to present something and they just want to get it across, so they lecture somebody or they get on a soapbox, and they treat the other side as an it, and they just want to emote, whatever. So that is not dialogue. The other is when the other person is like that and they want to express something or get across some idea, and they're not particularly interested. They're so busy doing that, they're not interested in feedback. So then what I have to do is listen to them very carefully, which is hard to do. So that's the opposite of dialogue. Okay, so that summarizes it. I like dialogue. It can fail.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. All right. I like these series of meetups where we are taking three things, because it allows you to look at it from multiple angles. So Maritza, what do you think? I think this series is working very well.
I'm really enjoying it. I am going to seek your permission to go a little bit rogue here for just a few minutes. So I have here some words I want to share. That's two aspects. First, I want to bring in Harold Nelson. I know I'm going rogue, but Harold Nelson has a chapter in his book, The Design Way, that is it's like 6 very dense pages on imagination and communication. And way back in 2018, CJ did an entire discussion. We had a dialogue on imagination and communication. So I've gone back through my notes and his notes and found some words on dialogue. So we were looking at dialogue as defined creating meaning through words. That's the we accepted that definition to begin, and then we explored how to look at dialogue as a meaning-making process, and to assess its role in various of our conversations. There's a couple quotes from The Design Way that I think do a great job of identifying this for us. There's on page 136 of The Design Way, Stolterson and Nelson say, the ability to listen to the other is at its best when the exchange is heard as if it's a conspiracy. In other words, a breathing together, initiating the second stage conversation, a turning together. To have a conversation is to pay full attention to the other, to find relations and connections that can serve as starting points for contracts and even fuller relationships. This is a very sensitive process in which possibilities for emerging contracts and relationships must be carefully developed. The ability to go slow, to be patient, to pay attention from the first contact to a full conversation are the building blocks. there's so much in that quote that I had to share it because I really, what you were just saying, what some of the others that commented on, I actually took the time to find that and pull it up because that's what came to mind for me. And I was just like, oh, I have to share that. Now there's we have many more notes, but we did another discussion on dialogue, the art of thinking together. But I'm gonna leave it with that quote.
This is very good. This is not rogue. This is exactly where we would like to go because we've had thoughts of these three people presented. Now we're going to the concept of dialogue itself, and you're adding something which is extremely valuable. So please take your time. Go ahead.
So I wanted to, and so this quote, there's so much in it. Actually, I should post that for you guys because it really is a fantastic quote, and it kind of does a great summary. But a breathing together, a turning together. To me, those are like the pivotal statements here. Like, imagine if every conversation into which we enter, we ask ourselves, is there a breathing together? Is there a turning together? And if we use that kind of as a basis for determining whether or not we find ourselves in a dialogue, I think that's a very powerful idea there. It's it's starting a group exploration, a turning together. Like, metaphorically, does it involve a collective angular shunting to tune in to a topic? And I think that's answer is going to be yes if all the participants are paying full attention to each other. In other words, if everyone is invested in finding relations and connections, then we're on that path of breathing together. And I think that was such a beautiful turn of phrase that it's just, he spends, so in the book, and the same pages, because it's like 6 pages of really dense stuff. But shortly after that, they also talk about there's a conversation stage, and Nelson and Stoltzerson go into talking about the third stage, which is dialogue. And they say with dialogue, there's a move towards shared understandings and expressions motivated by the desire and intentions driving the specific situation. This phase of the process is essentially the creation of a common understanding among those within the process. And so I think that takes us back to the notion of, dialogue is a process. And, we have spent so much time here on Comprehensivist Wednesdays talking about systems and processes and how the parts should be greater than the whole. I think this is yet another example of that, where we're saying, we're not in the process of identifying truth. We're not here trying to make a compromise. We're looking at the pieces and parts, but we're not accepting nor rejecting them. We're just attempting to reach a common understanding that there are all these pieces and parts, and potentially some others as yet unidentified. In the same section, another piece there says to reach a common understanding does not mean that everybody has to have the same understanding of the situation. It only means that everyone is clear about one another's understanding. I think that's another pivotal aspect of dialogue. We're not trying to become identical copies of thinkers. We're seeking just the space to acknowledge what is being thought. And I think that gets lost so often in today's modern interactions, because we think that we need to have a common ground. And basically what this is saying is that the dialogue is the common ground. the intentionality to see the various aspects and to seek to understand one another. That's the common ground that you're seeking, not to agree that point A is point A. And I think that's like so huge a concept that that was something that I wanted to put in there, Shrikant. I could say a little more, but I'm gonna stop there because I think it's a lot.
That's excellent, Maritza. So, in response, let me go rogue as well. So let's bring in one more thinker here, and that is Julian Jaynes, and how he thinks about consciousness. So he calls consciousness, he says, consciousness is analog of reality created using metaphors. So it is the idea of original participation moving into final participation. That's how Owen Barfield says that it starts with, take example of grasp, right? You have your hands grasping something. That is original participation. Now that grasping, you say mental grasp. So you're grasping with your mind. And then you use the same thing to do things in the world. I grasp a business. Now you can't grasp the business like this. So you're taking something which is out there, bringing it in here, and then going out in order to apply it in the world, to transform the world. So there is a loop going on, if you will, a dialogue with reality of consciousness. So it's taking in stuff from reality and doing stuff to reality. And consciousness is an analog of reality. And it is built through metaphors. Like grasp, for example, you cannot, like, if you carefully look at the words, now this is going back to Owen Barfield, when you look at history of the words, you will see many, 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 many things like this. That was a bright idea. You see, it's light being transmitted. It's transformed into something that is happening in here. Oh, that's not clear to me. Again, you're using the sight in order to move inside, to talk about consciousness. So Jaynes' core identification is that consciousness is an analog of reality built through metaphors, through language. Now, let's look at dialogue in that context. You see, if that is what consciousness is, what are you doing when you are actually doing a dialogue? These are two separate consciousnesses. These are two separate analogs. You can think of consciousness as a simulation of reality. So consciousness is analog of reality. It is simulating reality. It's simulating various possibilities of what you could do so that you can choose the one. Instead of just being reactive, you are being proactive in looking at the possibilities. Now, that is one consciousness. Now, what is a dialogue? When is it that these two beings are actually communicating with one another? And I like the term that you use, Maritza, it's a meaning-making process. So it's only when you see how you understand the context of the other person and seeing how they are seeing reality, and you understand that and are able to communicate to the other person of what you are seeing in a way where they can connect it themselves in their own mind. So it's a loop that goes, it starts by listening. That's why listening or receptivity is what all these people focus on. Because if you're not receptive, you are just broadcasting into ether. you are not communicating. The communication requires that there is a receiver, and you have to understand the receiver, have a sense of what they are and how they are seeing things. Only then you will be able to communicate to them. So it's that loop. Bill, you're next. Oh, sorry, Maritza, you had something. Go
Sorry.
ahead.
Yes, Bill, I'm sorry. I'm going to throw one more thing in very quickly before I cede the floor here, because what you're talking about, I'm throwing one more. So, David Bohm is not the only one who's written a book titled Dialogue. His is on dialogue, but William Isaacs has a book called Dialogue as well. And he tells us that thinking together implies that you no longer take your own position as final. You relax your grip on certainty and listen to the possibilities that result simply from being in a relationship with others, possibilities that might not otherwise have occurred. That's what came to mind to me in what you were just saying right now.
I mean, actually, the position that Julian Jaynes has on this is actually even more radical. What he's saying is that when you are actually listening to somebody, he has this concept of analog eye, that you have your consciousness is this analog eye that is going through this metaphorical space. And when you're listening to someone, you're actually ceding that space to that other person. And you're trying to, for that much second, that much moment, you are genuinely trying to see where their analog eye is. How is their analog eye operating? So you're letting go of your analog eye to place them, and then going back to your analog eye. So it's a very it's a very vulnerable position when you are actually trying to listen to somebody, because you're saying, oh, I am keeping aside my analog eye, which I have spent so much effort building, because I might learn something here. So excellent. Maritza, thank you so much for bringing all of this up. Next up is Bill. Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, that quote was great, Maritza, and your elaboration of it was great. And the dialogue between you and Shrikant just now was really great. And it kind of great in itself, and it also sets up what I'd like to say, which is this. As I said an hour or two ago, each of these three thinkers has a model of the less productive state of consciousness and a model of the more productive state of consciousness. And each has a notion of the role of dialogue in getting from the less functional to the more functional. But each focuses on a different problem that dialogue is solving. So Bube focuses on the problem in this less functional state of consciousness, the problem of unilateral maximization of self-interest by treating others as objects. And Bube is saying dialogue can solve that. Okay, Bohm, what's he focusing on? He's focusing on words as habitual ways of thinking that can involve misperception or distortion. And he's focusing on the role of dialogue in changing the way that we think by changing the words we're using. Okay? And then Bohm, according to the Wikipedia page, not Bohm, Barfield. According to the Wikipedia page, Barfield has this notion that the more functional state of consciousness we're trying to get to is a state of consciousness that experiences the unity in various things outside of our bodies, the unity in others, the unity in nature, etc. And the less functional state of consciousness can only see plurality. It can't see the unity. So dialogue can get us from the perception of only plurality to a perception of more unity. So the point I'd like to make here is that getting from the less functional state to the more functional state by overcoming these three problems through dialogue is about learning to let one's defenses down. Because when one's emotional and nervous system defenses come down, one can open up to this more functional state of consciousness. And so that's why Maritz's quote from the Design Way was so important, because it put on the table the word contract and the word relationship. Contract, not in a narrow sense, but in a general sense of mutual expectations between two people about which of one's needs the other can meet and which of one's needs the other cannot meet. And in return, which of the other's needs one is going to meet because one can and wants to, and which of the other's needs one's not going to meet because one can't. And that's what a contract is. It's these mutual expectations. And the clearer these mutual expectations can be gotten through dialogue of the kind talked about in that quote, the more one's defenses can come down, because one knows one has clear expectations and one's not going to suffer unpleasant surprises. So yeah, I'll stop there, and thanks for listening.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bill. This kind of being open to things. I mean, if you look at these traditions, right? I mean, David Bohm is using J. Krishnamurti, who in turn is using the deep ideas of Indian philosophy. Both Owen Barfield and Owen Barfield is using the New Testament, and Buber is using the Old Testament as the base. And what is it essentially saying? It is saying, be open to reality. I mean, to put it in Jane's term, it is saying, accept that your consciousness is an analog of reality. It is a map of the territory. Have respect for the territory. Say yes to territory unconditionally. Okay. Don't get attached to your maps. Don't get attached to the products of your consciousness. There is reality. There is existence. There is God. There is Brahma, whatever you want to call it. It is everything. It is everything. And it includes not only everything that is, but all the potentialities that can exist. It's much, 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 much larger than you. And what you are doing is that you're a limited being with limited capabilities, and you are creating these maps. Your consciousness is such a map. It is the analog. So having that humility in the face of reality, it is simply saying, it is what it is, and starting with that as the principle. Now, this is not subjectivist. Okay, none of these people at a core are subjectivist. They are saying reality is what it is. You can see that in my favorite quote of Newton, of saying, that I seem to have discovered only a shiny shell. This is at the end of his life. Everybody said, okay, with Newton, we have now figured out, mankind has figured out everything now. Okay, that's what everybody was saying. But he was saying, I seem to have found a shiny shell, whereas the entire ocean of truth remains undiscovered. Okay, that is the exact position. Like, this is the epistemic humility. It is combined with tremendous epistemic ambition. They are all trying very hard to grasp as much as they possibly can, every second, every moment, in every encounter. What can I learn? So there is ambition and there is humility. It is ambitious humility, or humble ambition, whatever you want to call it. But it's both those things tied at the hip. That is the ideal here. Next up is Jeff. Jeff, go ahead.
Well, I really appreciate the things that you all have shared here in the last 15 minutes or so. I would agree with all of them. But the funny thing about it is, what Bohm is asking is to suspend for a moment whether you agree or disagree with anything. He's like, stop it, just turn off. Oh, I agree with that. Oh, I don't agree with that. Oh, let me correct that. Oh, let me whatever. It's like he just says, like, give it up for a little while. Suspend it. To your point, Shrikant, of just give up your own analytic eye. Your own, not analytic,
Analog. Analog.
your own analog eye for a moment. Just if you can do it, whatever. You've spent your whole life building it. I get it, but I mean, honestly, it's just your own vantage point. It's limited by your own experience and your own genetics and your own socialization and your own. It's limited. It's fine. You've spent a whole lifetime building it. It has worth. It has important worth. But like Newton's point, it's just a tiny part of the overall, and so just suspend it for a little bit and explore that of others. Interview others sincerely, to see what you might learn, and without even constantly judging. Oh, I agree with that. Oh, I don't agree with that, and that that in that suspension of the judging, that there's actually, if you really look at it, it is the most self-interested thing you could possibly do. It's I know what I think. I need to actually find out what other people think in order to maximize my own learning and get better in my own thinking, get wiser, taking in the experience and the lessons and whatever others have gained. And so, and I would offer one thing, that in my experience of facilitating, this as best as I can, that it really, it's a fascinating exercise if you ever try it, to identify, within yourself and then share it with others. Whenever you're going to express an opinion, what is the question to which about what I'm about to say is my answer? What is, I'm about to give a conclusion. Okay, well, my conclusion is my answer to what question? And what it does is, when people can do that, when you can just stop for a second and say, well, what I'm asking myself is this, and my answer to it is that. Just that. But my question, the question I'm answering, that I'm asking myself is this, which is a significant part of self-awareness. And my answer to my question is this. You'd be amazed at the level of how the quality of communication gets much higher and much better. Because when there's a discussion going on where people are just giving their conclusions to each other without ever specifying or articulating the questions to which their conclusions are their answers, that's where you get this discussion of conclusions that are just running up against each other or just not connecting to each other. You wonder if we're even talking about the same thing. And it turns out to be, interestingly enough, one of the core methods for marriage counseling, to be able to say to another person, rather than just talking towards them or maybe at them, just pause for a second and say, here's the question I'm asking myself. Okay, and my answer to the question that I'm asking myself is this. And then the other person can say, here's what I'm asking myself. And my answer to the question that I'm asking myself is this. And in the gradual improvement of the questions that we're asking ourselves and each other, there's a greatly enhanced possibility for improved dialogue versus debate or argument. And so I'll just offer that as a little practical aside. When you're stuck in something that does not feel like dialogue.
Thank you, Jeff. Now, I don't know. I mean, the actual, like, if you look at, let me see here. I want to throw in again. I want to use the strategy that Maritza used of going rogue. If you want to expand it further, we've looked at Mortimer Adler's work in Great Books and his concept of great conversation. And if you look at all these great thinkers across history, actually in almost every field, they are actually conversing, not just with the people around them and trying to do something, but they're actually conversing with everything that has been said. Okay, they are honestly trying to understand where they are and trying to understand, okay, this is how this person is thinking, and then making a very sharp judgment, yes or no. I think that is critical, because it is very easy. It's not about just piling things on. It is about finding truth, finding structure. You have to listen, and then you have to speak. Both are crucial. Both are crucial to do that. So what all of these people do, whether they are in science or in philosophy or in literature or in visual arts, they are taking in everything that people have said, and then they are saying, this is what I think. And they produce great work. Production of great work is sacred. It is not enough just to listen. You have to speak too. Louis Sullivan puts it best. He says in his autobiography, my absolute favorite quote of his is that life began to break in upon him. He's describing himself as a child. Life began to break in upon him. A continuous breaking in from the outside and breaking out from the inside was to shape his destiny. Okay. Now, each word there, each concept there is crucial. It is breaking in. You have to let it break in. It will break you. It will break the ideas that you have. You have to be open enough. And then you have to break out. You have to speak out truth as you see it. And that you're going to listen to the response of the world to that. Doesn't mean that you are necessarily right. But you have to listen. You have to let things break in again and then break out again. And with that process, you move towards the territory. It is not going here or there. It is not just immediate gratification of conversation with people around you. So you're trying to get to what Darwin or Newton would call nature, what the Indian philosophy would call Brahma, what the scriptures here would call God. You're trying to get to that. And this is natural, it is breathing in. It's like saying Om, When you say Om, then you breathe in, you listen, you speak to the world, you speak to Brahma, and then you listen to Brahma. And you do that in a single breath, each breath, and you grow like that. So both those are critical. It is taking in, comparing, deciding what it is, because it's like a seed, you see. Again, this is Louis Sullivan. You're trying to get to the seed of things. You're not just trying to collect things, Francis Bacon puts it very beautifully. It's like, man is not like an ant who collects things and just piles it up. Man is not like a spider that just spins a web from within itself. He says, man is like a bee who goes, visits the flowers, a whole range of them, and brings things home and builds a home out of that, so that you can keep doing that with others. So that's what the human condition is. So it is the openness. So there is the openness and there is the judgment. Both are necessary for growth. All right. So this has been amazing. Marisa, what do you think of this conversation?
Oh, it was delightful. I love all the different aspects people brought. And it's always so great when people come and bring, additional aspects of a work that, we were previously unfamiliar with. It's really nice. And this last bit, I love the adding in of other bits because it's so holding true to our goals of comprehensively viewing things. I'm really enjoying this series, by the way, Shrikant. The aspect of looking at three things is just, I'm really enjoying it.
Excellent. And I think one of the conclusions, one of the lessons from today is that this going rogue is a crucial part of it. So we always do this, like we spend time putting things down of what each person said, so we can all kind of meditate on that, then look at commonalities, then look at differences. And once we have had that conversation, then we go to the topic that we are focused on. And then we'll bring in anything that we want.
I agree. Yes, I absolutely agree with you. I think it brought a richness to the discussion that we would have not otherwise had we only stayed within the parameter of those three.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody. We'll see you soon. Oh, I have to tell you that there are a couple of interesting meetups. Tomorrow, we are looking at Aristotle's Poetics, and the topic is going to be the place of plot. Aristotle has something stunning to say about the crucial role. He regards plot as being the thing in a work of literature or a play. And you can find out why tomorrow. And on Friday, Jang, Evanik, and Joe are doing their series on Design Your Life. And they are going to be talking, they're going to have a conversation on friends as mirrors. The role that friends play in our lives, in our self-improvement. So, that's what is coming up. So folks, Marisa, do you know what you're going to do for poetry?
So no poetry this Monday.
Oh, no poetry this Monday. Okay.
In 2 weeks, we're doing James Wright.
Okay, wonderful. All right. Good night, everybody. Bye.